Welcome to Green Building Matters, the original and most popular podcast focused on the green building movement. Your host is Charlie Cicchetti, one of the most credentialed experts in the green building industry and one of the few to be honored as a lead fellow. Each week, Charlie welcomes a green building professional from around the globe to share their war stories, career advice, and unique insight into how sustainability is shaping the built environment. So settle in, grab a fresh cup of coffee, and get ready to find out why green building matters.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Cicchetti. And today I've got Lisa Tharp with us. She's with Lisa Tharp Design. Can't wait to talk about her career and also get into some eco paints and some really cool, innovative things she's doing. So, Lisa, you're outside the Boston area. How are you doing today?
I'm terrific. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I can't wait to learn more about you and some of the cool work you're doing. But I've got to ask all my podcast guests, just, hey, take us back. So where'd you grow up and where'd you go to school?
Sure. I grew up mostly in Connecticut, and I had a lot of different art interests, architecture, design, journalism, film. So I went for the best city, I thought. So I ended up at Boston College.
Nice. And I know you're still up there. Did you move around a little bit, or you've always been up in the New England area?
Actually, I asked my parents for $200 graduation day because I already had a job lined up in New York, and I was having a tough time thinking about leaving Boston. So it's a place near and dear to my heart, but it took me a long time, circuitous route to get back up here.
Oh, wow. That's what the parents are there for, right? And then as I understand it, you went to NYU, you got an MBA there. Is that right?
I did. Yes. So I was recruited out of school into packaged goods marketing. And I got my MBA at night, which I wouldn't necessarily advise. I turned it into a workaholic. But I then started to crave doing something even more creative. So I started classes in film school. And that's when I decided to move on to get into something in New York and in the more creative field. So I joined HBO at that time.
Yeah. And so tell us about that early career. So HBO and then later many years at Time Life. So it sounded like you got into the creative side. And then later we're going to talk into your design. But talk us through what was it like there in the 90s and early 2000s in that line of work.
Yeah, sure. It was a wonderful place to work, and I had a wonderful lifestyle. I was living on the Upper West Side. I was rollerblading in Central Park every weekend. Oh, cool. So I felt, even as a city dweller, I felt very connected to nature and really surrounded by inspiring architecture. So for me, just the lifestyle alone was worth the ticket to ride. And then HBO was doing a lot of inventive things at the time. And I was surrounded by so many creative and collaborative people, lots of inspiring role models, that it was just a wonderful experience. And I probably would have never left had I not been recruited down to Time Life Video and TV by a boss at HBO. So that's a little bit of my early career before I made the career switch to design. Yeah,
well, and it's a big part of where you're at now. I guess I love New York City. We work on a lot of greening of existing buildings in New York, so I could only imagine that's probably a fun place to live there. So yeah, why don't you tell us, how'd you get into the interior side of things, and especially the green side? Did you have an aha moment, or how'd you know to go that way?
Sure, I think the green side actually started quite young. I was raised on stories of waste not, want not, stories of my great-grandparents, Bartolomeo and Maria, who immigrated from Italy with little more than their creativity and resourcefulness, growing their own food and making clothing and reusing and repurposing everything. And so that was really very inspiring to me. I was also very interested in design from a young age, and thought maybe one day, since I'm a person who loves variety, maybe one day I'd try my hand. And back in 2010, that was the culmination. I had spent a few years researching green design and healthy design, because those aren't always the same things. And we built the Concord Green Healthy House. And our goal was to model, best practices in both sustainability as well as being very careful of the health of workers and the occupants. That turned out it would be us, but that we were trying to model those best practices in this house. And we got a number of participants, and that really launched my career switch as well, because the architects with whom I worked did a great job of publicizing the project. And so I started to get inquiries from blogging about the project. And that's really how I started and launched the design firm.
Oh, wow. Well, I love that influence, your parents, then your grandparents, and the eco-friendly side of things. So I like to always ask my podcast guests, did you have any other mentors or someone you looked up to, maybe even open some doors for you?
Well, there was early on in the packaged goods world, I got great training from a young rising star named Geraldine Bragg. And she went on to actually run a bunch of major companies, but she was extremely disciplined, yet she also had this great sense of humor. And she taught us really that rare balance of being a good manager and being a good leader. The manager part of do things right, and the leader part, which is do the right things. And I've taken those lessons with me throughout my career, and I'll always be grateful to her for those.
There's a lot of wisdom there. A lot of people don't know the difference between a manager and a leader, and just that influence. So I love what you said there. So looking back, what are some things you're really proud of?
Well, I will say that the Concord Green Healthy Home was a real proud moment. I think going from just having a germ of an idea and then doing all that research and really teaching myself how to sort of technically do design work and draw interior elevations and learn how to choose products that make sense and collaborate with builders and architects. And so much good came out of that project, including, improvement of my own health and the opportunity to combine the best of historic traditional building principles with the latest in modern technology. And so that project has continued to yield gifts many years later.
Oh, that's fantastic. And tell us kind of what's keeping you busy today. Tell us about your design firm. I know some of your work's been in many leading publications, even on TV. So just tell us a little more about Lisa Tharp Design.
Sure. Well, we have a nice, again, variety is a key word. We have a nice variety of types of projects that we work on. Some are just the furnishings, traditional interior design, and others include renovating as well. We sometimes work on renovating historic properties that have very classic bones, which are very inspiring to us. But we're also working on projects that are, a beach house or a modern city apartment. So we really run the gamut and enjoy that variety and try and, rather than having a certain look, we try and bring a bundle of strong principles to each design project that we do. We try and honor the architecture, really create a sense of place and honor and enhance the connection to nature and views and location and neighborhood and community. And then, of course, reflecting the clients themselves. So those three muses really inform every one of our projects. And then, of course, we're also trying to, it's a luxury business, what we do by and large. And so we also are working very hard to expand the reach of our company goals and our values. And so we've launched a furnishings collection that focuses on local making and sustainable and healthy making practices. And of course, then our collaboration with Ecos Paints, our newest venture, is another way for us to bring designer results in a healthy package to anyone who is looking for a better option for paint.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I want to talk about the paints. Why don't we go there first on the material side? Is that what made you want to start that line of organic paints? And, how is that going? Was that kind of hard to do or not as hard as you thought?
Great question. It was actually, a labor of love and a way to pay forward my gratitude towards and belief in the company, Ecos Paints. So when we were building the house 10 years ago, I discovered the line of these non-toxic paints and varnishes and stains, and they were only available in the UK at the time. And yet they tested better than 25 other paints that I tested for the house. And so I told the painters, we're going to try this non-toxic paint. We're going to use it for floor paint. And I'm paying a lot of money to ship it over, which I don't feel great about, but it's my only option because it's that good. And the painters were very skeptical and we can't guarantee it. We've never used this product. I said, it's fine. I will bear the risk. And afterwards, they were thanking me. I go home without a headache. I can paint with the windows closed. They were calling it liquid gold. So to have, longtime painting contractors converting to the product was very satisfying. And so more recently, I started connecting with Ecos Paints on social media, and we were tagging their products, and they reached out to connect with us. And the conversation just started from there. And I felt here was a way for me to help them. Now that they were available, they started up a plant in South Carolina and were shipping from the US. So that made it a lot more, less energy embodied in the product line as well. And it's all made to order. So I offered to create an edited line of tried and true 60 colors that, from a designer standpoint, these are favorites, and we'll put palettes together for you so you can easily choose your colors and put other colors with it. And out of that came Lisa Tharp Colors for Ecos non-toxic paints.
Oh, I bet that was a lot of fun for you. And like you said, a way to give back. And what a great testimonial there. And just the simplest form with headaches and air quality and healthier homes. You think it's focused on what's it made out of, but it's obviously a big, healthy building movement right now. So, well, that's kind of a good segue. I'm curious, obviously you've got the eco-friendly side covered, and you're restoring. There's nothing greener, right, than restoring an existing home or building. That's very eco-friendly. But what about this healthy building movement? We're trying to get out of this pandemic right now. Lisa, are you getting more requests for, is this a healthy home? How's that going? How's that going in your world?
I am optimistic that both the climate crisis and the pandemic are further accelerating the focus on healthy indoor air quality and more sustainable, fossil-free buildings, self-sustaining buildings, less is more, adaptive reuse. So I really am optimistic that more and more individuals are making informed choices. There's so many wonderful products available now that there weren't even, 10, 12 years ago when we were first embarking on the Concord Green Healthy Home project, that it's really exciting to me. And so with all of our clients, we try, even if they're not asking for these attributes, we are offering them to them. We are educating them about better choices that they can make. And I'm really hopeful for our cities. I think the more we can focus on human scale, human-centric, nature-centric decisions, and try and, as cities are obviously very sustainable in that there's greater density, but with the pandemic, I think there was a huge exit from cities. And I think it's given cities a chance to sort of rethink what the experience of living in a city is like, and how do we make it more pedestrian and bike friendly, more accessible for all, more green space, urban gardens. All of these things I think are coming to the forefront in a way that might not have sped up as quickly had we not had the pandemic.
No, that's good perspective. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's talk about a project you've mentioned a couple of times. For our podcast listeners that aren't familiar with the Concord Green and Healthy Home, can you talk a little more about that project?
Sure. It was actually planned and built as a family home for myself and my family. And it was really born out of a combination of my strong interest in design and combining the best of old and new methodologies, but also my both interest and need to create a healthy indoor environment for myself and my family. And so we found a piece of land in Concord, Massachusetts, and it was in a very historic neighborhood. So we developed, we worked in partnership with, I put together an amazing team, I must say, of the best of the old and the new. So Connor Homes out of Vermont was a historic reproduction design firm, and they agreed to work with Zero Energy Design out of Boston, who a bunch of Cornell grads who were really on the leading edge, cutting edge, and still are in green and sustainable and passive house principles. And so that team worked together, and I learned so much in collaborating with them in designing the home. And then 80 Construction was the builder. And we had a lot of great participants. And we used a lot of reclaimed materials, recycled materials, yet the aesthetic was very sort of almost a gallery loft by the beach kind of aesthetic. And the house fit in very well with the neighborhood. That was very important. So it looked like it didn't just sort of plunk down from a different style. The vernacular was respected. And we learned about a lot of products along the way, everything from the better choices of insulation to, the right fresh air system. We did radiant heat and plumbed for mini splits for AC rather than doing the forced hot air, which is never great for anyone who is susceptible to asthma or, it really dries you out. Like Europe is filled with radiator heat. And I think when people from Europe move here and they encounter forced hot air, I think they're not very happy about it for those reasons. But anyway, so yeah, I think the project was very much about best of old and best of new.
Okay. No, thanks for telling us more about your project. Way to lead by example. I think that's just fantastic. So let's talk a little more about what's keeping you busy today. So what do you find yourself spending time on when you show up to work these days?
Well, we've got a number of great and varied projects and really inspiring clients, and we appreciate their trust. It's really a privilege to work on a personal residence and create home for someone. So we really treasure that. We are expanding our furnishings line and creating a mix of classic traditional pieces as well as more contemporary sculptural pieces. So that's been really fun. And thinking about what's next, how can we further expand our reach with our values and exploring some new collaborations with focus on passive, self-sustaining small homes. I have a real interest in that and thinking about where do we go from here. So more to come.
More to come. And I love to ask this next question to green building professionals like you. Lisa, what's next? What are you reading up on, or what do you really think's coming down the road in this green building movement?
Well, as I said before, I think there needs to be a lot more focus on urban development and thinking about everything from, how do we make our cities more human friendly, and also thinking about everything, including public housing. That's oftentimes the unhealthiest type of housing. And I think a lot about a book I read years ago, which I still turn back to, which is A Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander. I don't know if you know of this book, but for me, it's an incredible and should be required reading, I think, for anyone interested in architecture, design, city planning, et cetera. And it's all about his research team identified 253 patterns that explain why certain environments feel good and work well for us humans. And, there are some traditional or even ancient design principles that work with nature rather than conquering it or worse, defying it. And there are so many great principles in there that if you read them and you see the little illustrations that go along with them, you have these aha moments, chapter after chapter. That is why I've always liked this, or that is why I've always felt good in a room with windows on two sides rather than one, because the light is balanced and you get more natural light and there's no glare and humans just feel good in that. Or a pattern number 21, 4-story limit. Why, once you go past 4 stories high, if you're living in a tall skyscraper or working there, the people are ants on the street. You're not connected to nature. Going outside is a big event, and you're losing light and views and open space when your cities are building up. And you think about a place like Paris, which is universally loved as a city, and the parts that you always see in the movies, they're really not more than a few stories tall. All the buildings that surround the characters in the movie walking through a scene. And it's no wonder that it's so loved, because Paris has, at least historically, been very protective of, building height limits. And I think that even when you think about something like public housing, I think when you see, very tall buildings that are just monotonous and, almost inhuman, then I think you have a discouraging experience. And so my hope is that some of these principles will become much more to the forefront as we think about what is sustainable, what is healthy, and what is, human-centric design.
Yeah. Well, I hear you with all that. That was really well said. Thank you for that. So the next few questions are more about you, kind of some rapid fire questions here on our podcast. Lisa, what's your specialty or gift?
I would say, I think I have a certain fearlessness to pursue a passion, even if I have a lot to learn about it. And that has served me well in my sort of winding career path. I do tend to get a little bored at times. And so craving that variety sort of pushes me to go after things that I just have a real passion for, that I don't necessarily have all of the skill set to go after it. But, I'm willing to be a lifelong learner and get inspired by others who are pursuing a better way of doing things.
That is a gift. Let's talk about routines or rituals. Do you have any good routines, rituals, good habits?
That's a good question. I find myself regularly asking why not? And I think that question leads to a lot of interesting endeavors. And I think it makes life a little bit richer, or a lot richer. I would also say on the rituals front, I would say Mondays are for team meetings and no outside meetings.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, on the podcast, I like to share what I call pro tips, if there's just a good habit or anything like that. So that's good to peek into your world. As we get to know each other more, Lisa, I'm a fan of the bucket list. So could you share one or two things maybe on your bucket list, maybe travel, adventure, maybe write a book?
Those all sound good, Charlie. I think on the travel front, I have a blading. I love to inline skate. I hear Barcelona is great for that. So I wouldn't mind trying that out someday. I've long dreamed of building and living in a small, self-sustaining house by the sea. And I think it's been amended to a house high above the sea, unfortunately, given rising sea levels. But that's always been something I have not yet done in a permanent way, and would love to do that.
That's really good. I was in New York City recently. We were giving some clients this coffee mug that when you pour a hot beverage in it, it's a map of the world, and it actually shows the rising sea level. So while it's very depressing on one hand, at least it's a wake up call, and it's just a conversation starter. So
that's clever.
Let's talk about books. Is there a book you'd recommend?
Well, I think I spilled the beans on that one. Power Languages.
I'll put a link.
Power Language is definitely the book I would recommend if you have any interest in.
Yeah, no, I'll put a link in the podcast show notes. I love to capture all these good books. So to all of our listeners, look in the podcast show notes. We'll put Lisa's LinkedIn link. We'll put this book and anything else we've referenced here. So two more questions. Lisa, looking back on your career, is there any career advice you wish you'd received earlier?
Yes, I definitely tell young people to question, examine, don't just follow a path because it's expected of you or people recommend it to you. You really owe it to yourself to find your jam. And if you follow your passion, you will be better aligned with who you are in your work, in your mission, in your purpose. And I've seen time and time again, when people align themselves with their highest and best potential, success will come and reward will come. And that's not necessarily monetarily, although that usually also accompanies the ride, but you will find much more happiness and satisfaction in life, I believe. And I also say, don't assume you have to wait until you have experience, which is a theme with me. Be a bit fearless, make your own opportunities, ask to apprentice, learn at the feet of people who have learned before you. And there are a lot of people that are generous who are willing to share their knowledge with you if you just show real interest and passion.
Wow, a lot of good wisdom today, Lisa. Thank you for that. I recently was at a retreat, and they had a rule that said, don't just give good advice, share wisdom. And wisdom is based on your experience, and good advice is, hey, Lisa, you should do something. Instead, no, let's not say the you shoulds. Let's go over here and just share wisdom. And I think you've been giving us a lot of that today. So lastly, let's say there's someone listening to this podcast. They're getting inspired by your story, and they're thinking of jumping into this green building movement, this green home movement. Maybe they'd love to hear your path. Any words of encouragement for them?
Sure. I would say, it can seem overwhelming. You go online and you can go down that rabbit hole of endless information. And I would say, keep it simple. And this is one more place where less is more, that if you start by focusing on one area where something that's meaningful to you, that addresses a personal need, it's a bit akin to authors being told to write what you know, or artists, paint what you know. Focus on an area that is meaningful to you, because you will make a difference. And if you have that need, others very likely do as well. And you can find your niche, you can find your purpose in pursuing a simple one problem to solve for yourself.
Well, that's fantastic. So everyone, please reach out, connect with Lisa, let her know what you think. She's got some amazing signature furniture pieces, the organic, eco-friendly paint line, and check out some of her and her team's work on some of their designs. Lisa, this has been a very positive podcast, really made my day. So thank you for being on the podcast today.
Charlie, thanks so much for having me. Thank you for your great questions and for what you're doing in helping bring more information to people who care about these things. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.